A monumental decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices have ruled that race cannot be considered in college admissions. Protesters on both sides of the argument gathered outside the court when the decision came down. Emotions were high, the consequences enormous for minority students and the campus makeup of private and public universities. CGTN's Jim Spellman has more.
The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday ruled that race-conscious admission programs at the University of North Carolina and Harvard are unlawful. Those policies are generally known as affirmative action. They were designed to help undo generations of racial discrimination in the United States and create more diverse student bodies. U.S. President Joe Biden spoke out against the ruling.
I believe our colleges are stronger when they're racially diverse. Our nation is stronger because we are tapping into the full range of talent in this nation. I also believe that while talent, creativity, and hard work are everywhere across this country, not equal opportunity. It is not everywhere across this country. We cannot let this decision be the last word.
The court ruled along ideological lines, with judges appointed by former President Donald Trump casting decisive votes. Both cases were brought by a conservative advocacy group. The two cases argued that Asian American and white students were discriminated against when the universities favored admitting Black, Latino, and other minority students who may have had lower grades and test scores.
I mean, if you're an Asian American, you had to score 273 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black person to Harvard. Is that fair? I understand that people's lives are improved by getting into an Ivy League university, but that opportunity should be made available to people of every race, not just one.
Universities will still be able to take into account things like economic background when making admissions decisions, but when other universities have voluntarily dropped race-conscious admissions programs, the number of Black students who end up getting into those universities has often plummeted. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
And for more analysis on this, let's now bring in Bruce Fein. He's a lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. Sir, thanks so much for joining us. So look, a really controversial topic on both sides. But first, tell me, how does this now impact the application process? And what are the broader implications when it comes to education in the U.S.?
Well, we don't know exactly the impact. The decision, I want to underscore, is narrow. Any student, because of race or otherwise, who's suffered discrimination because of invidious activity, is entitled to be given a preference to overcome the hardship or the handicap imposed by the discrimination. The affirmative action that was addressed by the court were for applicants who hadn't shown any handicap because they had been discriminated against. The idea was that if you go back centuries ago from slavery in the United States, and try to trace the generational cause and effect relationship between underrepresentation of minorities in certain professions and what an ideal situation would look like if there had been never any discrimination in the history of the world, that shows discrimination that can be remedied. And the court said, no, it has to be an individual basis because rights belong to individuals, not groups. Now, the court did not say that you cannot consider a whole host of difficulties or challenges that may disproportionately impact minorities. For example, if you're born into a family that has parents who are on drugs, they're homeless, you don't have access to school, you haven't attended nursery school, you have to overcome challenges that other students wouldn't, or applicants wouldn't have to overcome if they're born into millionaires or multimillionaires, or even Barack Obama's children. And that you can give advantages, credit to those who have shown on an individual basis they have confronted great hardship. It could be lower income groups. It could be those with split families, maybe a whole host of other handicaps that everyone encounters in life if you're not born with a silver spoon. So what will be the actual impact? I don't think myself it's going to be enormous, and seeing suddenly you're going to have a plunge in minority representation. And one of the reasons for that conclusion is if you can look at a handful of states that had already voluntarily barred preferences of this court, that was California and Michigan, they had small dips in minority representation in the student body, but that could change as well.
But Bruce, I want to jump in. I want to jump in here because, you know, if you say the scope is so narrow, then why get rid of it? The opinion from Chief Justice Roberts suggested that how race has affected an applicant's life can still be taken into account when considering an application, as you said. But Justice Clarence Thomas sided with the majority. He himself has said he attended Yale because of affirmative action consideration. He said, we're not the sum of our color, but isn't he trying to play it both ways with a sort of let them eat cake mentality? Why shouldn't others benefit the way he has?
Well, the fact is you can't benefit one without handicapping and discriminating against another. As everyone knows, there's a fixed number of slots in colleges and universities. If you benefit one based upon race, you're discriminating against another based on race. Somebody doesn't get in because you don't have an infinite number of students, you know, because they're not offering courses or applicants over the internet. And that's why the argument I think that you made, although I'm sympathetic, it doesn't cut it. Somebody is lost out because of that preference. Now, I don't know how Clarence Thomas was enrolled in Yale. I don't know whether he could have got in or not. But after all, this is the law across the board. It's not based upon individual experience of the justices. This ruling covers all of the United States.
All right, just to clarify, Thomas said himself that he did get into Yale because of affirmative action. But there are, like you say, those who welcome this ruling because they believe that they're disadvantaged by the current admissions process. For example, some Asian Americans feel they're held to a higher standard for admission than, let's say, some Blacks or Hispanic applicants. But others in that community say they're being used as pawns right now in this debate. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I don't know whether they're pawns or not. I think it's a very simple idea that your standing in society, your standing in life should depend upon only your character and accomplishments, period. If your race has been used to discriminate against you, then you should be put in the position you would have had without the discrimination. That's the standard, and it ought to apply everywhere, not just in education, in jobs, and every other aspect of life. And I don't know whether that standard is viewed as should be controversial. Why shouldn't we all be judged on our individual merit? And I underscore, if someone is able to show that because of their race, they encountered discrimination, they were called names, that they were psychologically traumatized because the N-word was used, that can be utilized in the admissions process because it's tailored to the individual. But it's not just a blanket preference because of skin color. For example, most people would think that the children of Barack Obama probably aren't all that disadvantaged. Yet under the programs that were at issue, they would be subject to a plus factor like any other Black applicant, you know, who grew up in the hood with parents who are drug addicted and otherwise. That doesn't seem to be fair at all. But it is fair to say that anybody who's encountered handicaps growing up, low income, drug-infested neighborhoods is entitled to some kind of advantage or preference because they've overcome hardships that others have not had to overcome.
All right, Bruce Fein, we will have to leave it there. It is certainly a really contentious topic. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.